Greetings, curious acolytes of the galaxy, and welcome back to our archives. We've been expecting you. Darth Tyrannus Count Dooku is one of the most classic hero-turned-villain characters, who unfortunately gets overshadowed by the likes of Anakin and his story. On analyzing Dooku's life, we will find that he bears many similarities to the likes of Skywalker, which we talked about in a video recently as we described the complexity of Dooku's character. But even though he only joined the Sith to supposedly save the galaxy, one will find quite the contrary when analyzing all of his various deeds and crimes. During his tenure as a Sith Lord as well as a Separatist leader, Dooku committed an insane amount of scandalous crimes against people and against morality in general that would force one to question if Dooku ever truly was a good person. While we do know that he genuinely believed that he was doing what was better for the galaxy as a whole, the dark side corrupts all good intentions, and before he knew it, Dooku was just as horrifically cruel as the people he was trying to save the galaxy from. Therefore, we have decided to compile a list of some of the worst acts that Dooku ever committed. Since it is difficult to say which of these are worse than the other, we have decided to make a tier list, starting with more personal transgressions and ending on galactic-wide crimes. So, grab your holopads and find somewhere comfortable, as it is time to begin. Starting with Tier 1, our first mention is that of his betrayal of his best friend, Jedi Master Sifo Dyas. When reading novels such as Darth Plagueis, you will find that Dooku and Sifo Dyas were actually very close friends, and they had similar ideas about the state of the galaxy. According to the canon novel Dooku Jedi Lost, he and Sifo Dyas had been friends since they were younglings, having been placed in the same clan. As a Jedi Master, Sifo Dyas began having visions of the coming war, the Clone Wars, and began to grow a bit paranoid. Foreseeing an upcoming full-scale conflict, he started to advocate for the creation of an army for the Republic to use. The rest of the Jedi High Council deemed his ideas too extreme, and Sifo Dyas was removed from his position as a council member. In Legends, we find out that Plagueis himself, under the guise of the banking leader Higo Damask, convinced the unnerved Jedi Master to create the army in secret. As for Dooku, rather than perhaps just working with Sifo Dyas, he was just used to orchestrate the clone army, and then he used the pikes to kill Sifo Dyas, his own friend, ultimately betraying his best friend in all of his life since childhood. Even though Dooku advocated for never to killing a Jedi directly, any Jedi by his own hand for that matter, he still did so, and he has an impressive 5 Jedi kills in single combat, including most recently the likes of Jedi Master Yaddle, who was only trying to help him. But as you know, he is far more responsible for much more Jedi deaths indirectly. On Geonosis, Dooku watched as swaths of Jedi that he knew were gunned down by the newly manufactured droid army. Then, immediately afterwards, he almost killed a downed Obi-Wan Kenobi in cold blood had Anakin not stopped him. Over the course of the Clone Wars, Dooku became more and more cruel, and towards the end of the war itself, Dooku does something to a Jedi that is arguably worse than just outright killing him. In the novel Dark Disciple, Ventress and Quinlan Vos team up to assassinate Dooku. Over the course of their friendship, it turns to romance, and Ventress convinces Quinlan to use the dark side. Soon, they both face Dooku, but the assassination was a complete failure, and Ventress was forced to flee, while Vos was captured by Darth Tyrannus. In the subsequent months, Dooku would torture the Jedi Master in all ways possible, even convincing him that Ventress used him, and that she had abandoned him on purpose. Soon, Quinlan was released, but his mind had been so twisted by Dooku that he was now his full-blown apprentice. Dooku commanded Vos to return to the Jedi Temple on an undercover mission. However, the Jedi were suspicious of Quinlan and followed him back to Dooku's Separatist command ship. There, an epic fight ensued. At the same time, Ventress had also shown up to get Quinlan Vos back. During the fighting, Dooku killed Ventress in front of Quinlan before escaping. The grieved Quinlan Vos was convinced to return to the Jedi, and after some containment and therapy, he was back to the light side. However, the scars of Dooku torturing him and then killing his lover right before his eyes would always remain. For the final spot in Tier 1, we have the events of the Clone Wars as well as the Clone Wars movie, where Dooku captured Jabba's infant son and tried to blame it on the Jedi in order to bring Jabba on the side of the Separatist alliance. Not only was Jabba's son in terrible conditions when Anakin and Ahsoka found him in his cell, but Dooku ordered Ventress to kill the child to fully convince Jabba to join him. Ventress failed, and when the two Jedi arrived back on Tatooine to return Rada to Jabba, Dooku came to face them personally. Luckily, Anakin and Ahsoka had some brilliant thinking, and Anakin filled the backpack that he had been carrying Rada with rocks, while Ahsoka actually took the child and went on a different route. However, Dooku didn't know this and dueled Anakin in the desert, finishing the duel by slicing the backpack. Even though all that he struck was rocks, the point remains that he believed and fully intended to slay an infant with his lightsaber, and was gloating after he did so. Hut or not, a baby is a baby, and that if this isn't truly dark side in orientation, I don't know what is. Moving on to tier 2, we go a little darker. We're going to talk about the Clone Wars Season 4 story arc that begins with episode 11, Kidnapped. The events of this episode are less important than why we are actually mentioning it, which is that Dooku sold out the entire Togrutan population to Zygerian slavers. Even though the plan was ultimately thwarted by the Republic task force, it was under Dooku's orders that the Separatists aid the Zygerians in literally enslaving an entire population. I think that this is such a horrific act and is compounded by the fact that Dooku was angry with the Jedi for allowing slavery on Tatooine to run unchecked. Hypocritically, here Dooku is now selling out an entire population to slavery in a war effort. Talk about becoming the very thing you swore to destroy. Even Darth Vader didn't have anything to do with slaves. Speaking of entire populations, we aren't just going to brush over the fact that Count Dooku sent General Grievous, along with a huge droid army, to literally commit genocide on the Night Sister Coven. After their repeated attempts to kill Dooku, Dooku seemed to finally have enough and ordered their total annihilation. Upon Maul's return to Dathomir, he would be welcomed by a wasteland of corpses, and even Mother Talzin was barely alive, floating from the nether regions, now only present in some incorporeal form. Dooku may have despised Grievous, but he certainly used him like a mad dog on a leash, pointing him towards a target and then taking off the chain. Dooku did this with Dathomir, and the results were catastrophic. Now I know that the Night Sisters themselves aren't exactly the paragon of innocence, but again, mass genocide is not something that a sane person would condone under any circumstances. Speaking of mass genocide, we must begin tier 3 with the creation of the clone army and the accomplice to Order 66. Make no mistake, Dooku was fully aware of the inhibitor chips placed in the clones' minds, and knew exactly what their true purpose was. All of Dooku's talk about just wanting to get the Jedi to stop dying for political reasons, this seems like a far cry from his original plans, and a far fall for this Jedi Master. Dooku knew from the very beginning that the clones were capable of this, and despite showing remorse for betraying the Jedi, he was still completely willing to allow Sidious to execute Order 66. Count Dooku was fully prepared to stand by and watch as everything he grew up knowing and cared about was blasted to oblivion all across the stars. It was actually under his watch that the clone army was even created. The further down this list we go, the less I'm feeling bad for his ultimate death at the hands of Anakin, and the true evil man that Dooku became. However, it is debatable that this is just as bad as the final thing we will mention in today's tier list. Dooku was a catalyst for the creation of none other than the Death Star. While Dooku may not have been around to see the battle station in fully operational form, we know for certain that he was in the know about it. In Attack of the Clones on Geonosis, we can see that Dooku had a hologram blueprint of the Death Star, and he was also overseeing the Geonosians who were beginning their construction of it. The original plans of the Death Star were actually designed by the Geonosian and Poggle the Lesser, as overseen directly by Dooku. After the first battle of Geonosis, Dooku escaped with the plans to the Death Star and presented them to Darth Sidious for safekeeping. After the second battle of Geonosis, Sidious would actually begin the first bits of the construction of the Death Star, but progress was slow and they had to keep it hidden from the Republic. After the rise of the Empire, Galen Erso would make so much needed modifications that progress accelerated at a massive rate, as he basically overhauled the project before the real construction began. Back to Dooku though, not only was he in the know about Order 66, but also the creation of this ultimate weapon, a weapon that had the ability to wipe out an entire planet, a prospect he apparently was completely fine with. Because of Dooku, the Death Star plans were given to Sidious, making Dooku responsible for the deaths of millions or billions, as well as the destruction of the entire world of Alderaan. Count Dooku's death tolls reach unimaginable heights, and good intentions or not, there is just no denying that when he became a Sith Lord, Dooku, Darth Tyrannus, is responsible for some of the worst atrocities seen in the entirety of even the Sith Order. Dooku's death tolls would actually exceed that of Darth Bane himself, and many other prominent Sith from the past. But my friends, I would like to know what you think of this. I know we made a video a few days ago talking about the complexity of Dooku, and I feel as if this is a great companion piece to it. And if you haven't seen that video, where we analyze the lighter side of Dooku, I highly encourage you to check it out. Do you believe that Dooku is a sympathetic character, or is your mind changed after watching this video? Please feel free to open up a dialogue in the comments down below. And as always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and have a great day.